Welcome to Alpha Wolf Trading. Did you know that there's over 12,000 stocks or companies that trade on the OTC? Between the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, you have over 7,000 companies. But us as retail investors, we wouldn't know that unless we were researching. Because why? Wall Street focuses on the elite, the big companies. And where the retail investor has their advantage is in small and micro-cap stocks. Why? Because you have the opportunity to speak directly with leadership. That is what this is all about here at Alpha Wolf Trading. We're trying to find the hidden gems, and we interview the executive teams of companies that we think meet the parameters to be those hidden gems. I also want to make sure you understand that this is not a paid-for promotion. I collect no compensation for the interviews I do here. These companies that I interview have been identified as potential opportunities for me and the members of Alpha Wolf Trading to receive a higher than average return on our investment. These companies I have identified either because of a technical setup on a chart, a fundamental change within the organization, new management team, new products, all kinds of different things that actually lead me here. But what do I think is the most important? Leadership. And that is why I do these interviews. I want to understand what drives the person that is leading the charge. I want to feel their passion. I want to understand their vision and the strategy that they're going to use to achieve success. That is what these interviews are for. I want to understand the share structure and the cap table, the size of the TAM, the total addressable market. This is the opportunity to learn all of those things. So sit back and enjoy. And if you learn anything from today's interview, do us a favor. Subscribe to the Alpha Wolf Trading YouTube channel. Hey everybody, Tim from Alpha Wolf Trading coming at you with another follow-up interview. It's been a little bit since we had Brian Ostroff from Arianne Phosphate here to tell a story. And if you're wondering, if you want some real detail on what Arianne Phosphate is and how they got here, go watch the first interview. This is the second interview. We're just getting a follow-up on what's happening in the phosphate industry. And I think one of the biggest things that has come to surface and seem to be seen quite a bit is this thing LFP, which maybe Brian, you can tell us what the P stands for in LFP. And before we go there, Brian, I want to thank you for coming in and giving us this update. The ticker symbol is DRRSF, as in Frank. Okay. And you are traded on the OTCQX and also, was it the Toronto stock?
Yeah, we're on Toronto under the ticker DAN.
Okay. So a lot going on in the battery world. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so first, Tim, thanks for having me on. I always very much enjoy chatting with you. But yeah, there's a lot going on. So look, I'm sure your viewers, when they hear phosphate, they're probably thinking agricultural commodity fertilizer, which, of course they're right. 85% of phosphate does wind up in fertilizer, but 15% doesn't, and that 15% seems to be growing, and one of those reasons is, as you said, the LFP battery, the lithium iron phosphate battery. And the LFP has actually been around for quite a while, but mostly in Asia. And it's really only been the last couple of years that um, here in the West that it started to get some attention. And you and I were talking a little bit, maybe off air on being a little early or what have you. And I think it surprises people here in the West when they say, well, I don't necessarily want to bet on a new technology, and is that really the chemistry? And it's really only just started. And again, it's been around for a long time, 15 plus years, but mostly in Asia. So it might be new to some of your listeners, but they can take comfort in the fact that today over 30% of all batteries are LFP. So, you're not rolling the dice on some new technology that may or may not hit. It is real. It is here. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity that comes with that.
So in order to be for that phosphate to be used in the battery or in battery, let's say storage, right? What level of I guess I want to say purity do you have for that to be really ideal for that application?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And if anyone does kind of take the time and go back and see a earlier interview that we had done, we definitely get into the the ore bodies and the different types of phosphate that you produce based on your geological setting. But at the end of the day, you mine phosphate, comes out of the ground, and you're going to get different qualities of that phosphate. So it's not like gold. Gold, you dig it out of the ground in Nevada or Quebec or Siberia or Argentina. It's all the same. It all trades at the same price, and it's gold. Phosphate will vary. And again, if your listeners are interested, they can go back and get a lot more detail on that. But to your point, and how's this all tie in to today and the battery and what have you? So phosphate can basically be made into three classes of product. So there's the dry bulk fertilizers, as we've talked about, the MAP and the DAP, and the stuff that's really used for that kind of hardcore fertilizer. Then you've got another tranche that is a good quality liquid. So that's the stuff that's used in specialty fertilizers, hydroponics, animal feeds. And then above that, you have purified phosphoric acid. And that's the stuff that's used in food additives, Coca-Cola, but also that's the stuff that is used for the LFP battery, the lithium-iron-phosphate battery. So those are basically your three classes, and the nature of your phosphate is going to determine the ratios by which you can address these various markets. And of course, it's pricing, because at the end of the day, MAP and DAP trade for about $650 a ton. Those good quality liquids trade for like $1,100 a ton, and the PPAs trade for $2,500 a ton. And so your end product and your mix is going to be determined by the nature of your phosphate. So just to close this off, if you have a decent quality phosphate deposit and you've geared up your operations that you can make some purified phosphoric acid, you're going to make, let's say, 1 unit of the PPA, 1 unit of the good quality liquids, and maybe 10 units that's left over and needs to be made into fertilizer. Now, Arianne, we have an igneous deposit, and that we don't have those contaminants. So we don't have those leftovers that you just turn into fertilizer. So where some of those other deposits are like a 1-1-10 ratio, we could be a 2 units purified, 1 unit good quality liquid, and nothing for fertilizer. And so this really matters for 2 reasons. One, and we'll get into this a little bit, but guys that are interested in phosphate for the batteries are not interested in phosphate for the fertilizers. Like the car companies have no interest in selling fertilizer. But the flip side is the guys today that could theoretically aggressively ramp up to address the purified phosphoric acid market, they have a challenge, because if they make an additional unit of purified phosphoric acid, they're going to make 10 units of fertilizer. And they make their money selling fertilizer. So they're not going to get crazy in terms of rapidly expanding their production of PPA, because they'll shoot themselves in the foot. They'll make so much fertilizer that they're going to kill the market that they make their money on. And so, in essence, particularly here in the West, you really have a void where Arianne can slip in. We can quickly start to address that battery market without having to defend an incumbent fertilizer market. And that makes a huge difference. And that really, really, really sets Arianne apart from, most of the guys.
All right, so let's talk about Arianne. Would you consider Arianne a shovel-ready project?
I would. So I know that your viewers are pretty diverse in a lot of different industries and what have you. Look, when it comes to mining, like it's a process, to put it mildly. I mean, you've got to stake the ground, you've got to do a whole bunch of early stage stuff before a drill even hits the ground. Then it's a whole sequence of drilling, and maybe you have something economic and maybe you don't. And once it gets to enough of a size, you got to figure out if you can even, just because it's there, can you really get it out metallurgically and get the process right. And then after all of that, and you figure out how to do that, then you need to put the economics around it. And then after you've done that, you've got to go and start the process of permitting. And particularly in the West, and the whole not in my backyard and what have you, it's a real process. So your likelihood of getting all the way through that is really small. And while all that's going on, you've got to finance each step of the way. So, Arianne's really special in that it has gone all the way through. This has been 12 years, $100 million. And Arianne today sits atop the world's largest greenfield phosphate deposit as an independent. It is in the province of Quebec, which is a great mining jurisdiction. Most of the infrastructure that we require is already there. We've already talked about the purity of our phosphate. It is amongst, if not the purest on the planet. And we've actually got our permits. So we are shovel ready. Of course, it's going to take quite a few dollars to make that happen. And that's what we're working towards. But I mean, 98% of ventures out there have died before they've gotten to this point.
So would you agree that there's not going to be a shortage of fertilizer for the food industry for growing crops. I think the demand will probably just continue to get bigger because the population is growing, right?
Yeah, so not a shortage in demand for it. As to whether there will be a shortage of it. Look, phosphate is no one gives it much thought. I say this all the time. It's the Rodney Dangerfield of commodities. It just don't get no respect. And I think that's very true in terms of the fertilizer side of things. So, here in North America, we view ourselves as this big phosphate, sorry, not phosphate, but agricultural powerhouse, and wheat and corn and canola and all of that. But I don't think what we recognize is we import phosphate. I mean, we have and we produce, but we run a deficit and we've got to import phosphate. So, if you want to keep planting and growing and harvesting corn in Nebraska, that's going to depend on your ability to import this stuff. And guess what? South America, Western Europe, a lot of areas of Asia, they run deficits in phosphate also. And to your point, historically, demand for phosphate grows at roughly 2% a year. And we all need to import, and so where do we import that stuff from? And the biggest producer of the phosphate concentrate, it's the Middle East and North Africa. And very unfortunately, we see yet again that it's a part of the world that things can go wrong. And now you layer on the demand that's going to be coming because of batteries. And I think, look, not I think, I mean, the fact is we're just going to need more phosphate. And if you want to address the battery market in particular, we're going to need a lot more purified phosphoric acid.
So let's talk about the benefits of the phosphate. From what I've read, it is a safer battery, right? Because you avoid the whole thermal runaway issue with phosphate, right? I think it's more. I think I also read it's more environmentally friendly, right? So there are some real serious benefits to the phosphate, and if I'm not mistaken, it'll take more. It charges, right? Charge cycles that almost like by a significant amount, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And I keep thinking to myself, yes, the automobile portion of batteries is going to be massive. There's going to be a whole infrastructure play there that's going to be, I think, even bigger. I mean, we're still putting up gas stations today, right? We have nothing in terms of charging stations or places to go plug in your car, right? I mean, yes, you can charge it up overnight at the house, but there's also going to be this need to be able to charge elsewhere. And we haven't even really begun to put that infrastructure together. And in my head, I think to myself, there's going to be a lot of areas where you have batteries that are storing power that you can go plug into instead of off the grid, right? Stored power in batteries, I think, is going to become a very big thing. And phosphate, in my head, is the ideal. And maybe that changes. Who knows? I mean, I'm certainly not a chemical engineer. I don't know. Maybe they'll come up with something better. But I definitely think it's going to play a big role. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, again, the LFP is relatively new to the West, but the LFP has been around for a long time. And there are benefits to the LFP, as you said, no thermal runaway. They don't go boom. And you get a lot more charge cycles than you do in a lot of the other chemistries. The materials involved, as opposed to, say, nickel or cobalt, are a lot harder to source, and they're more expensive. And you have all of those challenges. I think the knock that had been involved with the LFP and why it really at the time didn't take off in the West was how far you could run your car on that charge. And that's really been overcome in the last few years. And today you can easily get 350 kilometers on a charge. And so, I think that is what has started to open it up here in the West. But I think that's ideal. Look, most of us, even though North America is a big place, the bulk of the population live in big cities. Myself, I mean, how much do I really drive my car during the day? I live 12 kilometers from the office, so I'll drive there. I'll drive to the gym. I'll pick up some groceries, and then I'll come home at the end of the day, and maybe I've put 50 kilometers on the car. And I think most people are that way. So I think one of the big obstacles to kind of the proliferation of the LFP has been overcome. Now, to your point, in terms of a big demand driver, so one of the other things that's great about the LFP is the cycle, the charge. So, we all remember that if you had something that used a rechargeable battery, let it run down, let it get to almost zero, and then plug it in. And whatever you do, don't unplug the charge until it's back at 100%, or you're going to damage the overall health of the battery. The LFP is ideal. It's very dynamic. And so to your point about energy storage, that makes it ideal for energy storage, because when you're taking in that power through, let's say solar panels or that, you don't know if it's going to be sunny every day. And some days it might charge and some days it might not. And then, you'll come home and it's one thing to capture the energy. You still have to store the energy. So you're going to store the energy so it's there when you need it, but how much do you need it? You come home, you flip on the TV or what have you, you start drawing it down, and all of a sudden it's like, there's nothing in the fridge, I'm going to go out for dinner, and you shut it all down, and your battery went from 92% to 86%, and now it's going to start to charge again. I mean, again, the LFP is ideal because it's very dynamic. So, to your point, there is a lot of consultants out there, industry analysts, that actually see by the end of this decade, you're going to have more LFPs being used in energy storage than you will in transport.
And I can see that. I mean, I can see that very easily. One of the things that I was told was that the LFP doesn't have the torque. It's not ideal for torque, right? So off the line, it is more ideal for longer hauls, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, those things will be figured out, but the bottom line is that there is a real growing recognition that phosphate is going to play a big role in the whole EV transition, right? And you're looking at a project that has a very high purity, shovel ready, I mean, just so people understand, in the United States, from concept to production, on average, takes about 17 years to get a mine running. From concept, we don't have 17 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Because by 2035, we're supposed to be having majority of the manufacturers making no more combustion engine vehicles and making all electric vehicles. Now, will there still be combustion engine? Yes, of course, because they're still going to be there, but they're not making any new ones. So there are going to be a whole lot of need for an infrastructure to support that type of transportation system. So the need is there. You have a shovel-ready project, and then recently you've brought on a couple of, I would say, I guess within your industry, some big name individuals, right? Some sharp guys.
Yeah, so let's talk briefly about that. You're referring to Rafe Sully, who had joined our company, joined our board early this year. So Rafe was executive vice president over at Nutrien. For those of your viewers who don't know, Nutrien is the largest traded fertilizer company. And specifically his role at Nutrien was he was CEO of both their nitrogen and phosphate businesses. So obviously knows phosphate quite well. And what is interesting about Nutrien is Nutrien today is the largest producer of purified phosphoric acid outside of China. China is by far the biggest producer of PPA. We can touch on that if you like a little later. But
so, real quick on that though, since you just brought China up, I don't know if you've seen recently, but there's a couple of things that they have curtailed. Germanium, they have really scaled back with their shipping elsewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's to say that China, who's one of the world's biggest suppliers, doesn't decide to scale back on shipping that
LFP, yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that because the LFP today, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 95% of all LFPs come out of China. So look, we've seen the IRA. There's also the Defense Production Act, DPA. The West is starting to understand that maybe they need to try and do a better job of sourcing, manufacturing, basically bringing that supply chain in. So instead of outsourcing, as we've gone through 30 years of doing, you're kind of getting the exact reverse now, and everyone's trying to figure out how to insource. And so that's a definite issue. So, again, in the case of Nutrien, they are the largest producer of PPA, purified phosphoric acid, outside of China. They are, fully tapped out right now. Everything that they make, they can sell, but they have some challenges. I mean, the industry has challenges. We just plain old need more. Without putting words in Rafe's mouth, I think one of the things that he sees and he understands is because of the nature of our phosphate, it really does give us an advantage in terms of being able to scale and address the PPA market. And just to talk about what that scale is, depending whose stuff you read, you're going to need in excess of an additional 1 million tons of purified phosphoric acid. I just told you Nutrien was the largest outside of China, and they do, around 250. You need to come along and get 4 times as much as the biggest guy outside of China. And again, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. So yes, Rafe Sully has joined us, and then more recently a fellow by the name of Mark Edinger. So Mark, also ex-Nutrien, and his role at Nutrien was to sell their phosphate products. So earlier in our talk here, I talked about kind of the 3 different groupings of phosphate products. Mark laughs at me when I narrow it down to 3, because every one of those 3 has subsets and subsets, and so Mark was the guy that kind of knows the subset of the subset of the subset, and pricing and supply and demand, and look, I think what both of these gentlemen recognized was that we're going to need a whole lot more PPA. And where's that going to come from? Who's in the best position to try and address that market going forward? And certainly, I guess their thoughts are Arianne's in a pretty good spot, and certainly I would agree.
The way you described Mark was that he is, he's the relationship guy, right? He knows everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
He knows who needs what, for what, where, when, right? He knows everything.
Yep. And so again, I think both of those gentlemen come with, look, Rafe, obviously a very, very senior guy, how to run these companies, knows all the, CEOs and C levels at all these companies. Before that, he was at Bain, so Bain Capital, we all know Bain Capital. And Mark, to your point, yeah, he's the guy that when, whatever, Coca-Cola needs some PPA for more drinks, or Purina needs for their dog chow, or farmers need it for their fields, Mark was the guy that you'd speak to try and figure out if you could get some. And I guess the conclusion from both of these guys are, as more and more people over time are going to be knocking on everyone's door to get PPA, where's that going to come from, and who's going to be best positioned to be able to address that demand?
You recently just had a trip somewhere with a bunch of heavy hitters. Can you give us just a real brief snapshot of what that was?
Yeah. And actually, thank you for bringing that up. So I guess it was about 3 weeks back, the Canadian government had set up a trade mission for critical minerals into Europe, into London and Paris specifically. And, I thought that was very interesting, because going back to my Rodney Dangerfield comment, when it comes to critical minerals, look, my presentations there would always start with something like this. Hi, I'm Brian Ostroff. I'm with Arianne Phosphate. And everyone, phosphate, I thought this was a critical minerals mission. And I think that slowly people are starting to realize that the P in LFP is phosphate, and you've spent a whole lot of time and energy and learning and a lot of dollars trying to secure your lithiums and nickels and cobalts and graphites. It's time to start thinking about phosphate, because if the LFP is going to be, again, even today at 30%, and you want to get away from China, what are you going to do? And again, there's just not a whole lot of choices out there. So, but the meetings were great. I think the Canadian government recognizes, and I'd say a lot of the West realizes that Canada is a great place. Most of the critical minerals you have here in Canada, of course, it's going to take investment to advance those projects and get the stuff out of the ground. Province of Quebec, I think, has really been at the forefront of that. They really are in the process of creating this huge battery ecosystem. And so, yeah, I think, look, even looking at it from an investor's standpoint, and I know most of the guys listen to this, you know, they're investors. They don't really care about the mineralogy of our phosphate. I get that. But I think there's a re-rating coming. I think that as more and more people come to realize, well, you know, I understand that if I don't have lithium, I'm not going to have an LFP battery. But at some point, the light bulb's going to come on and say, but hang on a second. If I don't have phosphate, I'm not going to have an LFP battery either. So where do I get my P for the LFP? And the reality is, because the phosphate business in general has been so miserable for the last decade, there's just not a lot of projects that have moved forward. So, you know, today, everyone knows 20 lithium names, and everyone knows 5 or 6 cobalt names and 5 graphite names and what have you. I think you'd be hard pressed looking globally. Again, maybe, you know, certainly in the West, I don't think you could come up with 5 names of phosphate. So as people go and look and to secure and what have you, I mean, there are other projects on the go, but as you touched on earlier, we're done. We're fully baked. We are big, permitted, shovel ready, you know, and so I think, and what I'm seeing is we're definitely getting some phone calls, and people are trying to figure it out. And again, we've seen these companies make big investments, deploy a lot of capital to get vertically integrated and make sure they get those other materials.
That's what I want to kind of bring up, is that to get this thing up and running, you're talking for capital spend of what, $2 billion?
Yeah, I mean, you know, ultimately we want to go downstream, and as Rafe came over and then Mark, you know, they really drove home the idea of, it's great to mine this stuff, and you've got a great product, and all these other guys are going to want to buy it, but why would you want to sell it to them? What you want to do is you want to make that purified phosphoric acid yourself, and then, you know, sell that to the battery guys. So that's really become the focus. So yeah, there's no question, it's big capex. You know, the mine's going to be, can be extremely large. We've tapped that back a bit. So rather than doing 3 million tons a year of production of the phosphate concentrate, you know, we are looking for a 2-step. So we go from that 0 to 1.5 million tons. And then phase 2, at some point, we'd go from the 1.5 to 3. But the 1.5 million tons, we would keep for ourselves or with a partner on the downstream, and we'd be able to make about 350,000 tons of purified phosphoric acid, which would make Arianne by far the biggest producer of PPA outside of China. But it's going to be expensive. It's going to be very expensive. You know, you're looking at, and we're finalizing the number around the downstream and doing some work. We have a very good handle on the mine, of course, permitted and ready to go. And so I'm going to caution your listeners, this is not a 43,101 number. We are looking to tighten it up, but you know, you were looking to your number. You're looking a little north of, you know, $2 billion. But if you look at what our output would be, and again, not 43-101 compliant, but just a little back of the envelope math, you'd be looking at a project that, if it were producing today, would probably be generating revenue somewhere around $1.25-ish billion, and probably earning somewhere in the neighborhood of about 800 million. So yeah, big nut to crack, $2.25 billion. But if at the end of the day you're making $800 million a year and you've got 50 years supply, pretty good economics.
So how long would it take? Let's say you get the funding. How long would it take to actually be up and running and producing?
Yeah. So you're going to have a bit of a lag again, because the mine, all that work has been done. So we literally would know where to stick the shovel the next morning, where the outcrop is, and what have you. So the build on the mine is, somewhere around 24 to 28 months. So a little over 2 years. Now, in terms of the downstream facility, your build is probably about that time as well, but there's a bit of a lag in that we don't have those final engineering and what have you done yet, and that's going to take a little bit of time. So we can, I don't know, 3 years, 3.25 years, 3.5 years. But as you well know, and maybe some of your listeners know, usually the gating item is knowing that the project's going to go. And once you know that that project is going to go and happen, then you get like an immediate re-rating. And I will tell you that in terms of like single asset development companies, that number usually looks somewhere around 1 times first year's projected EBITDA. So needless to say, that would just be an enormous lift. And look, for me, that of course is going to be massive. But even between now and finalizing that deal to make things happen, as more and more people come to realize that they're going to need phosphate, and more people come to realize that phosphate is every bit the critical material as everything else that they've been looking at, and they see the valuation of an Arianne vis-a-vis the valuation of much earlier stage projects in cobalt, nickel, lithium, graphite. I mean,
what's the current market cap, Ryan?
why do you hurt me like that? But yes, the current market cap today is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 50 million.
50 million.
Yeah.
And
so someone comes in today at a $50 million market cap or $60 million market cap for something that we have spent $100 million to get to where we are today. And if someone wanted to replicate what we did today, it would probably cost them more than $100 million if they had the good fortune of happening to find the same, good parcel of dirt as we did.
So I would imagine that, and I'm just thinking out loud, car manufacturers have to be looking at you guys and saying this could be a possible partner for supplying our batteries, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were
1 or 2
car companies conversing with us. And again, there's I think for a lot of reasons. Like one of the things that was particularly interesting to me in our trips to Europe is, everyone, of course, globally is concerned about carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions, ESG. But in Europe, I'd say it's one notch up. And when they do their calculations on the carbon footprint of their product, they actually go all the way back to the mine. Where did they source the material from? So even though it wasn't their mine, the mine that they got the material from gets included in their calculation. And the way the Chinese make purified phosphoric acid is different than the rest of the world. So the Chinese do something called the thermal process. And what they basically do is they take the phosphate concentrate, they put it in a furnace, they crank that furnace up to like 1600 Celsius, burns off all the impurities, the nickel, the cadmium, the uranium, and all that. They blow it through a smokestack, and pollution rains down on everyone 100 kilometers. And by the way, what's the greenhouse gas emission of all that coal that it took to fire up that furnace? Now, outside of China, you have something called the wet process, and I won't bore people too much, but the bottom line is it is much, much friendlier in terms of environmental. You're not spewing through a smokestack all those contaminants, and you don't require furnaces getting up to that. You're just mixing it with sulfuric acid and creating your phosphoric acid. And that's a big factor as well. So even if you were looking to move away from China for geopolitical reasons or security of supply reasons, if you're going to start factoring in the environmental footprint, China's going to be a very tough place to get your LFPs from. So again, outside of China, what do you have?
Right. So what do you think? I mean, the current climate for microcap, small cap stocks, right, is brutal. It has been for 29 months. The capital markets right now are the biggest problem because of the interest rate hikes, right? That literally, if you're a company that is in need of financing, no one's going near you because of the fact that they don't know what that deal is going to look like, how toxic it's going to be, right? And mines can be cash burning machines. I mean, there's no question about it, right? The question I have is this. I mean, this is true. These are proven reserves that you have. This is not an early stage. We got to drill and see what we got down there. We know what we got down there, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a very important point. So as I mentioned, we've already spent $100 million. That's been done. We don't have to raise that $100 million. We don't have to take, massive dilution, and especially in the face of just horrible, horrible markets. So we're very fortunate today. The bulk of our activities is really around speaking with potential partners, doing some studies and what have you. But the big cash burn is gone. We do have cash in the bank. I'd be nauseous if we had to raise like significant amounts of money at these kinds of valuations. And I mean, the nice thing is for investors and would-be investors, you can kind of take comfort that you don't have that big spend in front of you. And that's a plus for Arianne. And again, the flip side is there are some other projects out there. They're starting to move forward now. We're going to need them, but they've got that big spend in front of them. We don't.
So the stock has not performed well, right? I mean, I'm just going to call it like it is, but
stinks.
I think that and you and I kind of had this conversation the other day. Is look, what's the worst that happens? You decide that you're tired of messing with this stuff and that's it. You're gonna sell it and get out. You're gonna sell it down here?
No, look, I mean, and of course one never knows, but I think that if we were to just outright look to put this thing up for sale, there'd be a lot of interested parties. And it's like everything else. If you have some competition, then price is going to go up. And I don't think the opening bid would be $20 million on something that would cost over $100 million to replicate today with no guarantee of success. So, look, personally, I own a little over 5 million shares. We talked about Rafe. Rafe has come on board and he bought a couple of million shares. We have some pretty big, well-known shareholders that have bought and continue to buy. Look, there's never any guarantee of success, but today, the net present value of our last published net present value of this asset is $1.9 billion, and we're trading at $50 million. So again, no guarantee of success, but I mean,
at some point you got to look at it and say, okay, what's the risk reward, right? And in this environment, I'm just going to say it, and I'm not just talking about Arianne, I'm talking about a lot of companies right now have gotten to stupidity levels in terms of valuation. Just stupidity levels, right? We stretch things too far to the upside, and then we go and we stretch things too far to the downside, right? And as I see it, the demand for what you have is not going to decrease. It's going to increase. And the timeline for which they need it is also going to shorten, right? And at some point, that will create an inflection. And I don't know when that will be. I can't predict that. My crystal ball isn't working today. Or it never works, actually.
I was going to say, give me a call when it does.
Right. But I can say that there is a definite need, and the demand for it is only going to increase, right? That to me is a given.
Look, I think that it's a perfect example of heads I win, tails I win. In that there is that agricultural demand. It's going to continue to grow. There will always be an underlying demand growth and a need for phosphate. But the wild card is are we going to continue to grow at 2% a year, every year, and that's rock solid? Or are we going to start to grow at 6%, 8% a year? Because now the LFP is going to come along. Or in the case of purified phosphoric acid, that's going to grow even more. And, by the way, we talked a little bit earlier about back of the envelope math. All of those numbers are on the assumption that the price of purified phosphoric acid stays where it is. But is it really going to? I mean, I don't know the answer to that. My crystal ball isn't working particularly well either. But I mean, when you see these supply demand metrics, it's hard to see how prices are going to stay where they are. And the nice thing, of course, is even if prices do double, say for purified phosphoric acid or what have you, it's such a small part of the overall cost of your $70,000 Tesla. It's inelastic, right? It's inelastic. Or if you're Coca-Cola and you need the purified phosphoric acid for your beverage, you're going to pay what it is, because you're not going to shut down globally Coca-Cola enterprises because we're not going to pay that extra $200 a ton for purified phosphoric acid. So
what Rafe coming over and Mark, what are their primary functions? What did they come to do?
To make Arianne the single biggest player in purified phosphoric acid outside of China.
And let me ask you, Brian, how did they go about doing that? How did they go about doing that?
So I think that certainly the LFP coming along has done a lot. And so these companies now are starting to understand and starting to look. Look, everyone in the industry knows Rafe, and a lot of them know Mark. And I think it's just a matter of educating people, and in a way, I'm almost waiting. I'm Canadian, and therefore I watch hockey, and Wayne Gretzky was, arguably the greatest hockey player ever. And when he was asked what made him so great, his answer was, well, because I would never skate to where the puck is. I would always skate to where the puck was going to be. And so, look, we have spent many, many years advancing a world-class phosphate project. And now the world, I believe, is coming to where we're going to be, which is you need this stuff.
Rafe and Mark where the phosphate was. Now they're skating to where they think it's going to be.
Absolutely. Look, they see and they understand the coming demand, and so within that subset of phosphate, again, there's the different products and what have you. I think what they've determined is that purified phosphoric acid market is the one segment that is really, really, really going to, demand's really going to grow, and there's really a big question mark as to how are you going to be able to supply that. And I think their view is,
and it's sitting in a very good position to be the company that supplies that, a good portion of that.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. So, Brian, what are the catalysts, or maybe what should people be watching for from Arianne that lets them know that milestones are being achieved, or progress is being made? I mean, it's been 12 years, you said. If you've been in this thing for 12 years, you're feeling a lot of pain, right? But, at some point, like I said, that window of time is shrinking and the demand is increasing. But what is it specifically that investors should be looking for to know that things are on the right track?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I get asked that a lot. Back to my earlier comment, we're very fortunate in that we've done pretty much all that you've had to do. And that's a big plus, and should give investors a lot of comfort knowing that at the end of the day, we've been successful. Some of these younger companies, they have the ability to generate more noise because they're just drilling now, and so they can put out drill results, and they can do this and they can do that, and do a lot of the things that Arianne has already done. we've already done that. And so that perpetual every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, more news, more news, more news, that's not something that Arianne's going to be able to provide. We've done all of that. So most of our day is spent on getting the deal done, getting that partner on the downstream asset, getting the financing for the mine. Should mention the government in Quebec owns 6% of Arianne. We've seen that they have been huge supporters financially of Quebec-based ventures, particularly battery. So, I think that for those that are looking for baby steps in terms of milestones and showing that we're going to get to that end result, I don't think they're going to get that. And one never knows, of course, and every disclaimer in the book, but, for us, my sense is, one day there's going to be that real significant
announcement.
And, but what I do also believe that between now and then, and I don't know if then is, 1 month or 1 year, but between now and then, I think that there's going to continue to be a greater understanding of the potential of phosphate. And therefore, anyone who digs into phosphate, no pun intended, will, you'll have no choice but to stumble upon Arianne, even if you didn't know it existed. And so, I mean, look, do you know how many analysts cover us today? And so at all these firms that are out there that were early on lithium, nickel, cobalt, that have done really good jobs, I can tell you that those guys are starting to understand that we're going to need phosphate. And again, they will do their homework. They will understand who and what Arianne is. And I think we're just going to get a lot more attention, re-rating. But, to your point, one day we're going to wake up and there's going to be something significant that we can.
And I really wanted to focus on that because you're right. The early stage mines, they get news coming out all the time, right? Oh, this drill, this, showed that we've got this kind of, it's all great. You don't have that because that's all done. So really the next real big the next announcement that is significant is going to be the big one, right? That's going to be the big one.
Yeah.
And you can't tell you when it's going to happen. I can't say when it's going to happen, but I can say this, that at these levels where the price is trading, and, I'm looking at the long-term trend. It's been down for a long time, but at some point when that big news release hits, that is going to be the thing that breaks, that will be the thing that provides the momentum to change the direction of the stock, right? And how big of a move that is, who knows? I mean, I can't tell you because I don't think anybody knows, right? But it'll be significant. And, that is in my head, I would much rather be a little early and take advantage of these price levels of where it's at today, knowing that what's my risk? My risk is that you go to zero.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening. At the very least, okay, you sell it. You're not going to sell it here. There's no way in hell. I don't think you would take that offer. I'm pretty sure.
I used to work with the guy, and his comment always was, "You never get hurt falling out of the basement." and so, look, it's anyone's guess as to where this can go or what have you. But go back a few years, think of the first few lithium guys out of the chute when, everyone thought lithium was for medication, and see what they've become. And, there's no shortage of billion-dollar lithium companies out there that are nowhere near as advanced in their development as Arianne is in its development. And so, that is going to come. I think Arianne can easily be understood to be that it's going to be the leader. And, what's this thing worth? Again, if we were Arianne Lithium and not Arianne Phosphate, we had, the world's largest independent lithium deposit, and we made ideal lithium for batteries, and we were in Quebec and blah, blah, blah. Our market cap would literally be 100 times what ours is today as Arianne Phosphate.
All right, Brian, I think, unless you feel as though I missed something, I think we covered it pretty well, right? I think the risk reward at these levels are favorable, right? Look, I'm not telling anybody to buy a stock. People make their own decisions, right? Just look at the overall picture of what's happening around the world and the fact that LFP is becoming more and more prevalent all the time. And I don't think that's going to change. I think it's going to, as people become more educated, they're going to recognize that there is an absolute need there. And you're looking at a player that's got an incredible operation with incredible purity and quality. I mean, is it worth the gamble? That's,
Yep.
This is not a day trading stock. This is an investment, right? This is an investment in the future of where things are going. And again, I guess, if you're looking at Wayne Gretzky as an investor, right? Do you want to look at where things are today, or do you want to skate to where the puck is going to be? And the puck is definitely going to be in Arianne's favor. That's my belief. So I think it's worth at least letting everybody know, put it on your watch list, pay attention. You guys just got a grant, or so one of the partners that you had recently got a grant for.
Yeah. So, and that's on the agricultural side. Look, again, back to the heads we win, tails we win. The nature of our phosphate, which we talked about, really allows us to address whatever of the markets that we want to address. And so because our phosphate doesn't have these deleterious elements like cadmium or uranium, you have to go through a process and make the fertilizer. You need to acidulate it. I won't bore you here with that, but we've been working with a CJEP. For those of you that don't know CJEP, it's basically a college here in Quebec. And they've been doing a lot of work about, taking and working with our high purity phosphate and mixing it with organic wastes and some accelerants and things like that, and being able to put that straight on the farmer's field. No acidulation, no organic, boom, done. And it's pretty exciting stuff. There's still work to be done, but a new breed of fertilizers. But again, wholly reliant on a clean, high purity phosphate, of which 95% of the world's phosphate is not.
All right, Brian, thank you very much for coming in and giving us the update. When should I have you back? When should we do another recap? When should we do a follow-up?
I don't know. What are you doing tonight? No, look, let's do this a little bit more frequently, and I think the future looks pretty bright.
All right. All right, hold on one second. I am going to turn this off. Ticker symbol is DRRSF, and put it on your watch list. You have investor alerts as well. You can sign up, go to your website and sign up for alerts, because I get them all the time, right?
Yeah, actually, thanks for bringing that up. I would strongly encourage people to go and sign up at our website, because you would ask something about news. There are some things that we do press release, but we also put out a lot of industry stuff. So it's not Arianne today has announced this, that, and the other thing, but it'll be, such and such study has come out with regards to LFP, or such and such other company is building a gigafactory here in Quebec, or the U.S. government has just put in, so about the ecosystem as a whole. So if you're just looking, say, at Arianne for news, you can get that on your data feed. But again, signing up, getting on our, distribution list. There's usually something fairly interesting every week or so that'll keep your viewers up to date.
Perfect. All right, Brian, hold on one second. I'm going to turn it. Thank you for tuning in to another CEO interview here at Alpha Wolf Trading. Today we had Brian Ostroff from Arianne Phosphate, ticker symbol DRRSF, as in Frank. I hope you enjoyed today's interview, and if you did, do us a favor, give us a like. How about giving us a share? And while you're at it, why not give us a follow? Until next time, stay safe. Alpha Wolf Trading wishes you the very best of success.